So, I'm going to tell the story about how my mother and stepfather took me illegally to live in the United States when I was a child. I know this might be a sensitive topic, but the objective here is just to tell my testimony from the perspective of a child because I rarely hear those from the specific perspective of struggling in a new country, knowing that you should not be there, and being fully aware of how irresponsible your parents were, especially in the case of my own, because they were very abusive to me. I don't want to spend hours talking about all the details, so I'm going to cut to the chase a little bit. It still might be long, but basically, I was 11 years old. My mother had already divorced my father. They were both abusive, so fine for me. It wasn't a difficult divorce per se. The only thing that was difficult for me was the way the divorce went on because I had my bedroom with my toys and my things. And then out of nowhere, one day my mother calls me on the phone and says, "We're leaving the house. I'm leaving your dad." And, as a kid, and I was terrified of my father. They were both abusive, but I was more terrified of my father because obviously as a little girl, at the time I was 8. So as a little girl, it's kind of normal that you're more terrified of a man, of an abusive man than an abusive woman. And because he was always a monster to me, my mother was quite ambiguous. She had moments where she was really abusive and really aggressive, but then moments that she acted so nicely that it confused my brain as a kid, of course. But this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how I went illegally to the US as a kid, and I really didn't want to. So after that divorce, we spent a few years living with my grandma, and eventually I met my stepfather. I had a bad feeling about him right from the start. And what I was told always was that he was going to move to the country I was growing up in at that specific time frame. That was the thing I was told, that he was going to move. He was going to leave the US to move to the country I was in. And then one day out of nowhere, I was in school and I struggled with bullying a lot in school, and I shouldn't maybe have felt so sad to leave the school, but the bullying phase that lasted a couple of years had actually subsided, and so I thought finally I was going to live a sort of normal childhood with classmates that could be my friends and all that, and I was finally getting comfortable in school and not terrified all the time. And one day I come home from school and then my mom says, "We're moving to the US." And I was 11 and it was terrified, of course, because for me the US was, well, it was next to the country that I also grew up in Canada. But, that was completely in the past. I left when I was 6. I was 11 at that point. I was already adapting to the country I was in at that point. And hearing that we're moving to the US, all I could think about was the films I saw that were in the US. And, my conceived notion was that it was sort of, compared to where I was living at the time, which was one of the safest countries in the world, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to a war zone? That's what I thought, With a lot of people, that was my thought in my little head. And a new language, well, not a new language, but a new language in school. Although English and French were my first languages. And then I learned a language from the country I was in as well. So I was sort of, so it's going to be in English? I was kind of scared because at that point I didn't speak English, just listening to music. And I thought forgotten the language. And my mom said, oh, it's okay. We're leaving in 2 months. It's fine. I'll put you in classes in tutoring, in English tutoring, for you to get like a refresher of the English language. And in my head, I was shocked because it was a lot of information. And I also thought to myself, oh my gosh, the US is so far from the country I'm in. And I love my grandma and my cousins and my aunts and my uncles, and we're leaving everyone. And then what? I can't see people. I can't see them. I'm not gonna be able to see them. And she told me, we're just gonna move for a year because I need to earn money because I owe money to your uncle, and I can't make money in this country, so I need to go there to make some money, and then we'll be back. But to me, I actually had a diary at the time, so I have all my diary entries. And yeah, my brain is not pulling pranks on me at all. Desperate, I was shocked. Even in the diary entries, I couldn't believe it. And she said it was just a year, so I thought to myself, okay, we'll move, and then, we'll be back, and everything will be okay. But, it was still awful because I didn't want to be away from my grandma, especially because she was the only person that that I thought would protect me and loved me, that truly loved me unconditionally. And I didn't want to be away from her. We were really close. She introduced me to the farm life and to nature and all these things. And I just didn't want to leave that and go to an urban area, a different country, different people. Were they going to bully me? There was just so many questions in my head, Of course, I didn't understand what it meant to be legal or illegal. But I did understand when my mom told me, when we get to the airport and the policeman asks you what you're doing here, you say you're on vacation. And I thought that was a little weird. But then I slowly grasped that we were not supposed to be there, and that things were going to be complex. And I understood that from the way the teachers at the school, when I got registered, I understood that from the way I had no ID that I could present. I understood that because my mother had a car and drove all the time, and then suddenly she couldn't drive. And mostly I understood because a few weeks later I was told, we can't go on vacation or anything to see your family, to see our family. We can't go on vacation or anything. It's going to be a couple of years like this. And that's when I realized, oh, okay, so we're not supposed to be here, and we can't go visit the family because basically if the authorities find out that we overstayed the return ticket, because when you go to a country illegally, you buy a to and from ticket, even if you don't plan to return. And my stepfather was a resident in the US, so he was legal. That's important to mention for the future, because basically her guarantee was that she was eventually going to legally marry my stepfather, and so then we would get a green card. But that would take a lot of years to do. That would take a long time because they would have to stay together a couple of years in the US and then eventually apply for the green card and then wait for that process to happen. And because we were already there in the US, it was going to be, I didn't understand the process, but it was going to be more complicated than to simply take care of everything before making a move like that. But I was terrified and I felt helpless as a child of a mother who decided to move illegally to the US. I was terrified. I wasn't terrified that I was going to be taken by the police or anything like that. No, I was just terrified because I felt alone. I felt lonely. I wanted to be with my family. I wanted to visit my family. I wanted to be my grandma. And that was no longer possible. And this was in 2005. So this is in the era where social media wasn't a thing. And normal internet connection was just starting, at least for me. It was just starting. We had MSN Messenger, which is how I messaged my friends that I left when I went to the US, but it's different than now where you can just video call and you have social media and all that stuff. One thing that's important to mention is that I remember leaving when I left. You know, my grandma said that she had a terrible feeling about this and that she didn't trust my stepfather. And I thought that was odd because, I mean, I didn't have a good feeling about him when I first met him. But then what's a child to do when an adult man gives a child a bunch of gifts and things that you wanted for Christmas and all that, and acts funny and nice, and you think to yourself, oh, maybe he's nice, maybe he does like me. He had a daughter, and his daughter had the same name as me. She is Jennifer as well. And I thought that we could be friends, although she was much older. She was about, I mean, at the time it felt much older. Now the age gap is not that big. It's like 6 years, but you know, when you're 11, 6 years of an age gap is a lot. But I thought she could be my friend, but that did not happen at all. But I remember my first day of school, everything was just so terrifying because it was a legitimate cultural shock. Going from small town, living in a house where there was the back part of the house had chicken and a pig and plantations and trees and nature and all that, and then suddenly going to a place where it was just cars and loud music and a lot of different people that spoke a lot of different languages. We moved to Newark, New Jersey, by the way, so it was a very multicultural city, which I didn't mind at all. That's not the point. It was just that it was very overwhelming for a child because I noticed right away also that in the school there was a lot of division. Nationality-wise, although we were all in America, there was a lot of division. Like Mexican kids were together in a Mexican kid clique, Brazilian kids were in a Brazilian kid clique, that kind of stuff. It was weird because it was a difficult thing to adapt and I was scared. So I was so terrified and traumatized that I did not speak. I actually didn't speak. I stopped talking in public at all. Like I didn't speak. To the point where like months later, I said one word and my classmates, someone said, "Oh my gosh, Jennifer, you can talk? We thought you were mute." And I said, it was not great. The removal of the family support was terrifying, was sad. I would stay in contact with my grandma. She didn't have internet in her home, so we sent letters to each other. Still have all the letters, thank goodness, because she's no longer alive. She would say things like, "I miss you so much, I just want to rip every single hair out of my head because I want to see you again and I want to hug you and I can't." She couldn't just visit because plane tickets are and were at the time very expensive to the US from that country. It was terrifying that my mother had made that decision so impulsively. And turns out, by the way, that she was lying. It wasn't a year. I found out it was going to not be a year after we were in the US. Found out that it wasn't going to be a year. It was going to be basically indefinitely. I thought it was really irresponsible because of that. But little did I know that things were going to get even more complicated than that. Of course, there was some fear of, oh, so I'm making a life here. I have a bedroom now with other things of mine and all that. Not much, but we're slowly building, slowly getting clothes and some, not really toys, because by 12 years old, I wasn't really allowed to get toys and have playtime and all that because my mother was really controlling and she had to dictate all my activities. But I did do ballet and she registered me in a ballet studio, a pretty expensive one. It surprises me that they even accepted the registration, but also it was expensive. So I guess it's a one thing of if you pay, they don't really ask questions. But yeah, it doesn't matter. That's just a minimal detail compared to the rest. But feeling like I had lost my freedom because, of course, going from a very nature environment surrounded by family and people that I could just hang out with in the village, and then going to a city environment in another country, I wasn't allowed to do anything. I wasn't allowed to sleepovers. I wasn't allowed to hang out with friends that I eventually made at school. I wasn't allowed to basically do anything that wasn't completely surveilled by my mother and my stepfather, parents. Yeah. So basically everything I watched on TV was surveilled. Everything that I did was surveilled. When I talked to was surveilled. I later found out that they had installed a program in my computer to basically record everything that I typed, and it screenshotted every whatever minutes the screen to record anything I watched and all that. So yeah, I was very surveilled, and it felt helpless because my nature is to be a free bird. So it felt awful to feel so trapped and feel like I had no way out. Later on, it made sense that they would take me to a different country so they could just abuse me in peace without really having protective input from anyone in the family, especially my grandmother. I still tried to convince my mom that I wanted to learn web design, so I tried to learn web design by myself and graphic design by installing Photoshop. Of course, a pirated version of Photoshop, and also Front Page, which was where I would code my websites. And so I learned to make websites and all that, and I made my own website in the form of a blog, but I actually coded my website, and I used it as a diary, as an open diary for basically if my family or anybody back in the country I was in wanted to read, they could. And there I would write basically everything, including the abuse and how helpless I felt. Everything. Wrote everything there. And then a year and a half later, my mother found out what I was writing on the website, or that I even had the blog for that, because she thought I was just doing designs for the hell of it. And she forced me to delete everything, because, the whole point of going to another country was that it was convenient to make more money for them, but it was also convenient to control me and to do whatever the hell they wanted with me. And yeah, that's pretty much how that happened. There were alternatives. We were not in absolute poverty in the country of origin. There was a legal route that could have been taken, but as always, my mother, and again, this case is my case in specific, my mother's case in specific, she is a narcissist and she is a sociopath. So trademark traits of a sociopath is impulsive decision making and self-centeredness. And that was exactly what that move reflected, was not caring how much it would affect a child, an 11-year-old child, not care about that because it was a whim. She wants to move and we're moving, period. And we're not doing it in 6 months. We're not doing it in a year. We're doing it as quick as possible. Because also back then you couldn't just book a plane ticket that quickly. It wasn't like now, if you want to just, I'm not in America right now, but it's not like right now where, if you want to travel anywhere, you can just do it in the space of like a week. You can pretty much do it, or 2 weeks. Back then things took a little bit more time, and at the time people used more the travel agencies and all that. So there were ways to do it, and she could have, if she wanted to really do it and really make the move as soon as possible, she could have done that, but not put me in a situation where I was at risk. Because then we're talking about risk, right? With everything that entails, the psychological risk, the trauma risk, the everything really that I already mentioned. But there's also another risk, which is the healthcare as a procedural risk, which is something that I didn't realize until I looked back and started thinking about it. Because as an 11-year-old child, you have to go to routine consultations, and I was quite frail, so I needed to go to the doctor often, but she couldn't just take me to any doctor. She had to take me to a doctor that didn't ask for documentation to a child. So she took me to this really sketchy place that had a doctor. He seemed nice. He was Indian, and he had people from other nationalities working there. And they were all very nice. I'm not going to say the opposite. The thing is, he vaccinated me with what supposedly was the newly released human papilloma virus vaccine that had recently been released at the time. And I have no record of it. No documentation proving that I was vaccinated with it. Nothing. So who knows what that was? Now you might think I am being a little bit paranoid, but I recently, and this is what also motivated me to record this video, I recently Googled his name, and he actually had his license taken away years ago because of malpractice. Yeah, so that worried me because my health has always been pretty bad, and I don't know if I ever had that vaccine. I thought I did, but I have my doubts now about that, and this is a very important health care thing for women. It's a very important vaccine to make sure that our uteruses are as protected as possible to not contract these kinds of viruses. So yeah, besides that, because that wasn't bad enough, eventually, because of all the psychological and physical abuse I was going through, I started having a lot of depressive episodes and self-deletion tendencies from very young. From when I was 12, 13, I was already having really bad existential crisis. And so eventually it was kind of, I stopped being functional because I was struggling so much. And then you get FOMO too, because you see all your friends that you went to school with for so many years in your home country. Well, it wasn't my home country, but it was the country that I eventually settled in and I thought I was going to settle in. And you're in another country and you're making friends, but it's different because I was already hearing my mother say that we were going to move to another city. So we weren't even going to stay in Newark. We were going to stay in Newark for a year and a half, 2 years. And then once I finished middle school, we would move to another city, which we did. We moved to Sayreville, New Jersey. So yeah, so I wasn't doing very well mentally. And, and besides that, I had a lot of skin issues. I had a lot of acne at the time, and my mother was disgusted with me because of it. She was very unkind with the way she talked about my looks, my appearance, my everything. She dissected my face and my body to basically criticize everything about me. So she took me to a dermatologist. But again, we weren't legal in the US, so it was a sketchy dermatologist that decided to prescribe me a miracle medication that would get rid of my acne in just 2 weeks and I would never have acne again. I believe, I don't know the name, I have no records of this, go figure, but I am pretty sure it was Accutane or something worse. Whatever it was, it has been taken off the market. It does not exist at this moment. It really messed up with my health. My skin, I took it for 2 days and continued taking it. And then just started feeling so much pain on my skin everywhere. My face and skin turned so red. If you just did this, it would hurt so much. It hurt to the depths of my soul. I'm joking, but you get it. Yeah, it hurt so much. And I felt like even when I was talking, I couldn't move my face because my face had turned so red, so painful and so dry that I couldn't move my mouth without feeling that my skin was going to completely rip. And of course, no one was held accountable for anything because what are you going to do? Legally prosecute a doctor that is sketchy while you're illegal in a country? This was the situation my mother put me in. And I think that was very, very responsible. And then, of course, that medication, turns out, could trigger really bad mental health repercussions. And it did to me. So then she took me to a sketchy psychiatrist, which, of course, there are no records of it as well. Sketchy psychiatrist put me on so much medication. I don't even know how they were able to actually release the medication. That was way too complex for my little brain to understand. All I knew was that I had a lot of medication and I had to take it. The medication, of course, didn't help. And that was that, basically. Don't know the names of any of these doctors. All I know is that it was nightmarish and I don't wish it upon anyone. I don't. And I think that it was such irresponsible parenting from all fronts, from every single front, because there is no guarantee And actually, there's a huge probability that whatever I was injected with, that potentially wasn't the HPV vaccine, whatever medication I was on completely affected my health long term. Eventually, I grew up to be an adult that does have quite a menu of health problems. It's complicated because as a child, you are supposed to believe that your parents are your heroes and that they're going to protect you. And from very early on, I realized that I was alone. And that was magnified even more, being alone in a country where I wasn't supposed to be, where I couldn't just return to see my family, and where essentially there was so much isolation paired with control, paired with just the knowledge that I should not be there. And then being told that, oh, actually, the move was for me because she wanted to give me a better life. No. It's a nice excuse. But in this case, it wasn't. She wanted to give herself a posh life. And that showed because she was more concerned with buying Hugo Boss clothes and Calvin Klein clothes and Louis Vuitton handbags and Lacoste polos. She was more concerned with that than actually providing for me. And I didn't want the expensive stuff. I just wanted her to see me and understand that all I wanted was to feel safe and grow up in a safe environment near the people that I loved. And the main person that was my grandma. And this is what I want to make clear. I'm not going to make moralisms about things. I am just telling my story, and you can do with it as you wish. You can interpret it as you wish. I'm not here to tell you what to think or try to manipulate your view. Just here to tell my story, show you the side of the perspective of a child that was taken illegally to a country, that suffered the repercussions of that things could have gone even more terribly wrong, and that the precarity that she put me through, especially when it comes to the psychological safety and the health access, she could have chosen that precarity for herself. And then once she had everything regulated, then she could bring me. That would be the responsible choice in my case, especially because she wasn't willing to provide or fill the gap that as a child, as an only child living in a country with her mother and a stepfather, it is just the truth that a parent needs to work full time to provide that emotional safety and care and love that if you take them away from a family environment, they will still need. And yeah, this is my testimony. I don't want pity. I'm just telling the story because perhaps other people will relate to this perspective, or other people will understand what I mean, and other people will not feel so alone in their story if their story is similar to mine. That is the goal of me telling the story. I hope that that mission was accomplished, and I thank you so much for taking the time to hang out and listen to me, and I will see you on the next video. Remember that if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more, you can watch the other videos, watch the series, Life Lessons from Psychology series, Psychology and Fiction series, the Ego Next Door podcast. You can listen to that, or go to the My Journey playlist and check that out as well. Now, thank you for listening, and I hope you have the rest of a great day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.